Hello and welcome to the Pinwheels pregame show. I am Mitchell Kaminski, bringing you White Sox talk every Wednesday at noon. This episode sponsored by Sports Mockery, sportsmockery.com for all your latest Chicago sports info, White Sox, Bears, Blackhawks, Bulls, you name it, over to Sports Mockery. Some of the stuff we're going to be talking about the show, I got some articles coming out later this week, breaking those down even further. So head over there. If you're a White Sox fan, you can read those. Beautiful Wednesday here today. Got my Chicago American Giants hat on. Forgot to talk about this a few weeks ago, but I live up in the mid-Missouri area, but they had a NASCAR race up at Kansas Motor Speedway, which is one of the best tracks on the NASCAR circuit. You also get some great barbecue, so I always try and go up there. And every time I am in Kansas City, I always make an effort to try and visit the Negro League Hall of Fame. Really cool museum, and even if you've been there once, you're never going to read everything that's in there. There's a lot of different stuff that's very easy to miss, so I always go back there because you're always going to pick up something new. Chicago American Giants, fun fact, their big history, Rube Foster was one of the guys that helped kind of found the Negro Leagues, or at least make it more organized. He was a pitcher for the Chicago American Giants. He saw all these white owners taking advantage of the good product that these teams were putting on the field. Because, like, let's be honest, it probably was a hell of a lot more entertaining product than what the MLB was showing. I mean, you look at a lot of these old highlights, like the Babe Ruths of the world. If you look at an old Babe Ruth clip, you look at this guy, and I'm not saying he wasn't a great player for his era, but, like, you look at him today, like, I don't think he'd be able to hit a baseball today. The guy was a fat alcoholic. You think, like, you take a look at that swing. Does that look like it would translate in today's game? Now you take a look at Josh Gibson highlights, and there's not a whole lot of them, but that guy looks like, you see something like him, like Roy Capanellas of the world. They look like that. That swing looks like it would translate a lot closer to today's game. So the product, I think, was a hell of a lot better. But anyway, he realized, like, hey, all these other owners taking advantage of it. Why don't we get a bunch black owners together? They all met in this Kansas City area, and he's like, let's make this a more organized and structured league. And that's how they had farm systems, everything. So Rube Foster played in Chicago. He kind of helped set up. I know there's a bunch of different leagues in different years, but he kind of helped organize Negro League Baseball, which I thought was pretty interesting. Other interesting little tidbit that I found there. So Satchel Paige, he was the oldest rookie in MLB history at the time. He made his debut August 13th, 1948. For Cleveland, he was the first black pitcher in an American League game. He was also the oldest rookie of the year ever. His first game, interestingly enough, against the Chicago White Sox, shut him out 5-0. So all these years later, not much has changed. Getting into the White Sox, couple former White Sox players still in the postseason. I'm always rooting for my former White Sox, most of them anyway. There's a couple that I don't like. Yasmani Grandal, he's not in the postseason, but if he was, I wouldn't be rooting for him. But Carlos Rodon, he's a guy I'm rooting for. I really enjoyed watching him when he was on the field his time in Chicago, so I continue to root for him when he's on these other teams. He had his second start of the postseason. You listened last week. His first start of the postseason this year against the Royals didn't go all that well. And I took a little issue with the fact that, he came out very confident in that game. He had 7 strikeouts in less than 3 2/3 innings of work. Like, he was clearly feeling himself early in that game. After every strikeout, he'd be like turning back towards the camera, making a face, or, kind of like swaggering around the mound, like sticking his tongue out. The man looked like a reptile. His tongue just constantly hanging out of his mouth. So kind of poked the bear a little bit. Royals didn't like that. That was all fine and well. First time through the order, but you're giving them a bunch of bulletin board material and kind of showing up a lot of their guys, and you have to face them a second time through the order. Well, you could have guessed, didn't quite go as well. The Royals kind of lit him up. Salvi hit a bomb off of him. He ended up giving up 4 earned runs on 7 hits, 3 2/3 innings before he was pulled. So he made another start. Game 1 of the ALCS, much bigger game now here, against Cleveland. Seems to have learned from his mistake. We saw a much more poker face, I guess, business-like Carlos Rodon on the mound, and I appreciated it, and he pitched a lot better. I always think I can't criticize him a little bit too much for showing emotion because I like players that show emotion. It is an entertainment product at the end of the day, but I do think there's a time and place for it because I can't come up here and criticize him for trying to put on a show and then supporting Tim Anderson for doing bat flips and whatnot. But again, I think there's a time and place. At the end of the day, the end goal is to win the World Series. Why make your job any harder than it has to be in an already difficult position by showing up the other team when you don't have to? That early in the game. I think you make a strikeout to end the inning. You want to celebrate? Great. Big play, final pitch of the game. You uncork one, you strike the guy out. You want to celebrate? Great. I don't know for confidence too, but you better be able to back it up. Let's not add any fuel to the fire when we don't have to. So I think we're done. Did a much better job. This game won. Business-like, all business on the mouth. None of that funny business. None of his sticking his tongue. No tongues were hanging out of the mouth. It was great. He looked like the Carlos Rodon I remember from 2021. Threw a solid 6 innings. Only gave up 1 run. 9 strikeouts on 93 pitches. Very solid performance. Shout out to our former White Sox, Carlos Rodon. Was happy to see he kind of cleaned out. He learned from his past mistakes. So that was nice to see. White Sox land, we actually had someone nominated for an award, believe it or not, on the mediocre 121 loss White Sox. We had a Gold Glove finalist. And this showed me, in part, mostly because the White Sox organization is incompetent, but also just how rare good second basemen are in the American League in general, because it was a very clear drop-off. So those of you who don't know, Naperville's own, the pride of Naperville, Nicky Lopez, nominated for a Gold Glove Award, or he's listed as one of the 3 finalists. He's going to be going up against other former White Sox, Marcus Semien, and then our division rival, Andres Gimenez from the Guardians. Gimenez, I think. Yeah, there we go. Andres Gimenez. And it's a pretty clear drop-off between the two. Now, let's get into Nicky first before we kind of compare, because he is a long shot to win this award, but it was nice to get a little bit of recognition throwing him on there. But number one, I think it does show a pretty clear drop-off. If that's the 3rd best defensive third baseman that you can find, I'd kind of like to know the process for getting these awards. And we'll get into some of the numbers in just a second. Now, I think Lopez had a pretty good season. This was one of the few people, I think, in that Aaron Bummer trade, because he was one of the 5 players that came back in that return. A lot of people like that return. I was not a big fan at the time. I think that was more quantity over quality. A lot of those guys were going to get DFA'd. Apparently, Chris Getz knew a lot of those guys were going to get DFA'd, and he could have gotten them without having to trade up a person, but he made the trade anyway. This is according to reporting from Jesse Rogers and ESPN. But they made the trade anyway, even knowing that a lot of these guys, like Lopez, probably going to be available. Lopez, I think, was the best player that came back in that trade. Soroka, who was the headliner at the time, didn't really pan out, didn't even finish the full season as a starter. So Lopez, I thought, was he would be a very good player on a contending team that you come in, you give him like 50 starts a season. He comes off the bench, a nice utility guy, pinch runner. I think that's a great role for Nicky Lopez, because I do think he is a pretty solid player. And I do think he did an admirable job for the White Sox. He hit around 240. Obviously, that's nothing to write home about. But when your highest, like your leader in batting average was Andrew Vaughn, who hit 246, you know what? We'll take that, along with the solid defense he provided. Can't be too upset. Now, this is where we get into a pretty big drop-off from the rest of them. Now, his overall defensive numbers are solid. He played a very good second base for us. He had 83 games at second base. 72 of those games were starts. He also had a little versatility. He played 39 games at he started 39 games, I should say, at shortstop, played 45 games there total. He had 5 outs above average on the season, which kind of is a good way to measure range for a player. 4 of those at second base. 1 of those, as we mentioned, at shortstop. Also, in the 640 and a third innings he played at second base, only committed 3 errors, which is pretty respectable considering that this White Sox team ranked near the bottom of the MLB. He was not part of it. He logged 100 putouts, 180 assists. He helped turn 33 double plays. Also, his range factor per 9 innings, it was 3.54. That ranked 5th in the MLB. So pretty solid range, good outs about average. That was a very respectable season from Nicky Lopez. Now, was it Gold Glove caliber? I don't know. Gimenez, who he's up against with the Guardians, defending Platinum Glove winner for the best defensive player in the American League. He also led all second basemen this year with 20 defensive runs saved. Marcus Semien, former White Sox, now current Texas Ranger, very highly credible defender in his own right. He had 10 defensive runs saved. Both players had an outs above average of 19. Now, as we mentioned, with the 20 defensive runs saved there for Gimenez, we had 10 for Semien. Lopez had -10 defensive runs saved. So not quite as good. outs above average. Each player was both at 19. He was at 5 and really 4 if you're just including second base, which is what he played. So pretty steep drop off. But this is the third best defensive baseman, according to Rawlings or whoever's nominating these awards. So, I mean, you can kind of see why the White Sox, who are incompetent in their own right, are having a tough time finding someone serviceable to hold down the second base position because there's not a whole lot of quality second basemen out there. And Lord knows they don't do a good job developing them. But I did think that was funny. Congrats to Nicky Lopez. I do think it is cool that he did get to play for his hometown team, even though it was such a crappy season. That's at least one positive that came out of it because he genuinely looked excited to be in a White Sox uniform. And I never question his effort. Like, at the end of the day, even when this team is bad, obviously I want to see a winner. But if I can't and I'm watching White Sox baseball, I just want to see guys that are out there that look like they give a shit. And he always did. He always did. Could never question the effort. He hit that home run late in the season, and everyone looked excited for him. Looked like a good teammate. When I was working an internship with the Chicago Dogs back in my freshman year, this year Carlos Zambrano was on the team. Actually, first time I ran into Carlos Zambrano, a little side note, they had this, we'll get into that in just a second. But one of the other interns I work with, he went to school with them at Naperville Central, I believe it was, Naperville North, Naperville Central, one of the Napervilles, one of the rivals. He was like, yeah, I was the equipment guy, for the high school team, whatever. Clearly wasn't a good athlete, but he was like, yeah, I mean, Nicky was always cool to me. He was a nice guy. So that was good to see. Happy for our boy. He has no shot at winning that award. During that same internship, though, interesting little story with the Chicago Dogs, real quick. So this was Carlos Zambrano. He played a year on the team, independent ball. And independent ball is pretty good. I'd equate it to about like AA baseball because you got a lot of these young kids that are coming up that didn't draft it that are trying to prove a point. There's 2 guys in the Kansas City Monarchs that year, or they were the T-Bones at the time. They got picked up within the first week of the season because they were pumping like 99 miles an hour. Some scouts saw them. They ended up getting signed by an MLB club. But then you also get some of these former MLB guys that are kind of washed up or former first-round picks that didn't really pan out or like kind of fizzled out of AAA that ended up in the league. So you get some pretty good competition in there. Zambrano wanted to keep his baseball career going. So the way that stadium is set up, if you ever been to that stadium in Rosemont, they got the clubhouses are in the outfield. So they got to walk all the way to the outfield to get out there. Well, the owner of the team, the story goes, he was reading a National Geographic magazine and about ducks, and he went to the promotions manager and was like, hey, like, I want ducks in the promotion. Promotion manager was like, how the hell are we going to get like ducks? He's like, I don't know. I just want ducks. So what they came up with to get these ducks in the promotion, even though they got nothing to do with the Chicago Dogs, was we got these giant duck costumes, and the promotion they were going to do in the 5th inning of every game on the weekend, we were going to have like one of the interns wrangle a bunch of kids and kind of get them out near the left field bullpen. And then they'd have the ducks run out where the clubhouse is, kind of like waving to the fans. And then after a couple like seconds, they would open the gate and this mob of kids would come running after the duck, and the duck would come running across the field, and any kid that tagged the duck would get candy. Well, as you would imagine, this did not turn out nearly as well as you would think it would. One of the first ones we had to do, one of the kids was out there and decided to tackle the duck. Well, unfortunately, that was someone in the costume, and it was like a Brian Urlacher form tackle, like wrapped up this thing, hip roll, bam, duck towards ACL. They had to like limp that thing on. We had to like run on the field and help like carry the duck off the field. So that was a disaster, like right off the bat. So now it was my turn to be in the duck costume, and I feel like an idiot. I'm walking into the clubhouse, whatever, coming down there, and my whole strategy was like, I'm not getting caught. I know we're supposed to come out there and try. I am just hauling ass across this field. No kid is going to tag me, whatever. So I'm kind of getting myself hyped up, and I get in the locker room, and there's Carlos Zambrano right there. He's kind of watching the game with a couple other buddies, like in the clubhouse. And so, we're kind of sitting there, and he kind of looks over at me, and he's like, oh, quack, quack, or whatever. He's like giving me shit for wearing the duck costume. I'm like, yeah, laugh it off. And then all of a sudden, we kind of just get to talk, and he turned out to be a pretty nice guy. And, mind you, I was wearing a duck costume, so I looked like completely ridiculous, but kind of forgot the fact that I was talking about. But I asked him, interestingly enough, like, hey, what was, when you were in the MLB, what would you say the toughest hitter you ever faced was? And he goes, there's 2. These are the 2 toughest by far. Albert Pujols, Jim Thome. Best hitters I ever faced. So I did think that was kind of cool. And then, oh, yeah, it was nice talking to you. Nice meeting you, Carlos. Yeah, you too. Like, and then go get him, quack, quack, or whatever. It's like, God damn it, I forgot I was wearing the duck costume. Then go run out there, and then got chased by a bunch of kids. But anyway, I digress. Back to White Sox baseball here. They're not going to be making a whole lot of moves this offseason in free agency. They've already come out and said they do not want to spend a ton. You kind of understand. I mean, I don't like it because their whole process. We've gone over this. They're going to be reinvesting the front office first, and they got a lot of guys that were on this team. They're going to be bringing back next year to reevaluate them. But they already said they're so far off from contending. It's probably going to be similar to what they spent last offseason, which is a little discouraging for a lot of White Sox fans to hear. Obviously, no one wants to sit through and watch another crappy season like that, and gets his showing you really can't trust a lot of the people he has identified to help kind of fix this thing. Because a lot of the moves he made last offseason, these patchwork guys, were the reason this team was so bad. Let's call a spade a spade. Like, he did not have a whole lot of moves that really panned out all that well. They do have a couple potential trade chips, though. So while they might not be active in free agency, there could be some changes coming because they do got some guys, believe it or not, other teams might want. Bleacher Report 2 days ago, they released an article, 25 top potential trade chips in the MLB. Of those 25, White Sox had 3 of them. 2 of those were in the top 5. I'm going to go over all 3 that they had on there and what I kind of think about if they could or couldn't get traded. So the first one kind of surprised me. Andrew Vaughn was on that list. And a lot of White Sox fans are kind of fed up with Andrew Vaughn because he was this, billed as a very good prospect coming out of college. He was one of the top bats, if not the top bat in that draft. And he's gotten there, and the numbers have been pretty underwhelming for what he was expected to be, or at least that's kind of the sentiment. People do not like Andrew Vaughn. I think people are a little bit hard on Andrew Vaughn. I don't think he's been a bad player. Now, I don't think he's anyone that you're going to be jumping up and down about that he's in the middle of your lineup. He's not carrying you to the promised man, but you could do a lot worse, in my opinion, than Andrew Vaughn. And the White Sox also have not done him any favors with his development. He got thrown into a shitty situation in a contending team where they're like, hey, by the way, you had very limited, under 100 games in the minor league. So not a whole lot of time to develop in professional baseball because it is a big jump from the college level to the pro game. Whether I like it or not. Aluminum bat's a wooden bat. Your pop tends to be inflated in college. Under 50, he is like 50 games in the minor leagues. They throw him in this lineup on a team that's expected to contend. Be like, oh yeah, you got to do the toughest thing in sports. Learn how to hit major league pitching. And while you're doing that, we're also going to make you learn an entirely new position that you've never played before since you were in Little League and play the outfield. And you have to do it at a high level because we want to win the division this year. That's a terrible situation for a rookie to come into with an old, out-of-touch manager in Tony La Russa. So, his development was stunted from the very beginning. And I think they kind of put him behind the 8 ball. I think if he was drafted in a better situation, he would be a much better player today. But because he was drafted so high, there is that high profile there where another team might want to take a flyer on. Number 2, he's arbitration eligible through 2026. So he's pretty affordable too. And I don't think a contending team would want to trade for him, but I could see a team like the Brewers or the Pirates or one of these lower market teams, that especially the Pirates, that want to take a flyer on a guy who is cheap and under team control and has posted pretty solid numbers if you need a bat. Last 3 seasons, let me make sure I get this right because we're all about facts on this show. Over the last 3 seasons, he's averaging 19 home runs and 75 RBIs. That's pretty respectable if you ask me. Now, he's not an all-star, but because the White Sox butchered his development so early, I could see another team being like, let's take a flyer on him. Let's trade for him. Mid-level team. So he's definitely a guy that I think he could sneakily be moved, especially because we got Elko down in the minors, who's been tearing it up. He looks really good in the Arizona Fall League, too. So I wouldn't be surprised they kind of progress him through the ranks, try and make him the new first baseman down the road. In the meantime, you probably get a placeholder at first base, but that could be the first guy to watch. The other 2 they had on that list, not really a surprise. At number 4, they had Luis Robert Jr. And I'm going to get into number 2, or number 4 was Luis Robert Jr. Number 3 was Garrett Crochet. I'm going to get into both of these, and then if I was a White Sox, which one I would do. With Luis Robert Jr., it's frustrating because that 2023 season, he did look like he was finally on the right trajectory to becoming that star that we kind of all had hoped he would be. And because he's been billed as this 5-tool player that's really good. And there'd be flashes of it. Saw a flash of his rookie year. He won the Gold Glove. And in the end of 2021, he really started to heat up at the end of the year, but he never put together that full season. And finally, he did. 38 homers, 20 stolen bases, 130 OPS plus, drives 8 into 80 RBIs. It's like, okay, we're finally heading in the right direction. He was a Gold Glove finalist that year too. Like it. So his value was at a pretty high. If you're gonna make the trade, if you planned on trading him, the offseason would have been the time to do it. Comes in 2024, has the hip flexor strain. And I think that affected him a little bit. The lack of line of protection also didn't help because he was not seeing a whole lot of hittable pitches. I think one of the reasons Shohei Ohtani, he's obviously very good, but there's nowhere, it's very hard to pitch around Shohei because you got Mookie Betts and then Freddie Freeman right in front of behind him. He has excellent line of protection. That's a very important. I think a lot of people overlook that. Luis Robert has had none of it this year. Not to make excuses for the guy. He was bad, but I do think it played a factor. And then not being very motivated, being on a 121 loss team, I also think didn't help. But a lot of the goodwill he had, it kind of got tanked because now you have another injury that flared up. He only played 100 games, and then he slashes 224, 278, 379 with 14 homers, 35 RBIs. His OPS plus dropped from 130 to 87. So that tanked a lot of his trade value. So I don't think I don't think you're going to get a ton in return or as much as you hope you would get in return for Luis Robert Jr. this offseason. So I don't think it makes much sense to trade him now. If you're going to trade him and he's going to be a trade chip, I'll let the deadline would make more sense to me because you can kind of rebuild some of his value. But you're not going to get a ton with him there. He's also expensive. If you're a team that's trading for him, you're going to be paying him at least $17 million this year to buy out of the contract. And then if you want to keep him for the next two, you got the $20 million club options. So that's going to be more of a contender that's looking for Luis Robert, where I think Vaughn would be more of a low-level market team that's taking a flyer, no contenders going after him. Only contenders are going to be going after Robert and Crochet, in my opinion. And given that Chris Getz was reportedly a pretty tough negotiator during the Dylan Cease trade talks, I don't think any team's going to match the asking price that he would likely put on a Luis Robert Jr. Garrett Crochet is probably the most likely player to be traded. He was excellent this year. I mean, you've probably seen the numbers. He was one of the few guys that was worth a damn on this team. They tried to trade him once at the deadline. Crochet's camp leaked that he wanted an extension. That kind of scared away some buyers. They decide, okay, you know what? We're just going to put him in bubble wrap, only pitch him 4 innings to start, keep him healthy. We'll trade him this offseason. Between those two players, though, if I'm being honest, and this is why I've said from the beginning, I really hope they do extend Garrett Crochet because, one, he said, I would like to be getting an extension. I would not mind coming back here. He said it multiple times. You don't have a whole lot of players saying they want to pitch for the White Sox. Good pitching is hard to find. But I look at all these players in the postseason right now who are former White Sox players, these blue chippers that we had, that we tried to flip for prospects. Are any of the prospects that we've gotten back right now any better than any of these guys? Chris Sale right now. I know he's not in the playoffs anymore, but look at the year he had. Cy Young candidate. Did anyone we get back ever contribute as much as he did this year to the White Sox? No. Moncada wasn't even on the damn field. Lucas Giolito's already been traded. And Lucas Giolito, while he was good, I think his ceiling was a number 2 starter. Number 2 or 3 starter. Mid-level starter compared to a Cy Young candidate. Look, Sales had his issues, but if you're still on the Sox today, I think the Sox would be better off with keeping Chris Sale during that time stretch than they would have been making those trades. Jose Quintana, same thing. He came in right away, and you could tell he was kind of pretty good. But I would argue, and it looked like a great trade at the time. I'm not even knocking Chris, but you get these prospects that come into our system with a history that doesn't develop prospects very well. None of those guys panned out much better. Ronaldo Lopez we traded away for pennies on the dollar. He's one of the best pitchers in the NL this year. So they trade away all these guys and all these studs, and none of them ever, they hardly ever pan out. You are banking on the fact that you are hoping, you have a stud here in Garrett Crochet, that you are hoping that one of these guys you bring back turns out to be as good as him. And that's so frustrating, especially because there's not many players in the MLB that you come in right away and they succeed and you know they're good. Chris Sale, you knew right away he would be good. They rushed him through the minor leagues after he got drafted. It's straight out of college. They throw him in the bullpen. Looks effective out of the bullpen. First year as a starter. Man was a stud. You knew he was going to be good. There's not many of those guys that come around. Garrett Crochet, I would argue, is another one of those guys. Rush him to the MLB. Break in case of emergency. He gets drafted 2020. Oh, crap. We had some arms that went down. We're right in the middle of the playoff race here. Let's throw him in. And Crochet was excellent in 2020. Didn't give up a run. He was great. In 2021, coming out of the bullpen. The man was a stud. He didn't give up a home run until June. One of the best relievers we had. Could pitch in a lot of different situations. Flexible. Then he goes through the injury stuff, comes in as a starter. He's been a stud. He's been a stud his whole career with the White Sox. He's one of the few guys that is going to be good. And he's probably going to be good for a long time afterwards. You can't say that about many of these guys. I don't think you could even say that about Luis Robert Jr. As good as he is in theory with all the tools and everything, he hasn't had the same amount where he came in, broke into the league, and immediately was making an impact. You see flashes of it here and there. But Garrett Crochet, I would argue, when he got called up in 20, immediately lived up to the hype. And then exceeded expectations as a starter. Those guys don't come around often. Why are we letting them go, rolling the dice that our boob of a GM can identify a good enough prospect that might turn into a player as good as him? And I get we're far away from contending, and he's not going to help us this year. But you see with a lot of these guys, like Verlander put together a Cy Young caliber season till he was 40. And I get he's one of the all-time greats, but it can't happen. These pitchers last a lot longer as long as you're taking care of them than they used to. They can, because they're not throwing, 9 innings every start like they used to back in the day. I do think, especially because he's already had the injury, he's overcome the injury stuff. They've been careful with them. That's the guy. If you had to extend either one of them, if I was going to be making the trade, I think they got it ass backwards. I'd be trying to trade Luis Robert Jr., but I still think that would be dumb because his value is very low, and they don't come. These guys don't grow on trees. I would keep Garrett Crochet. He's going to probably be traded. If I had to bet money, I would say he's traded, but I think it would be done because those guys don't come around that often. And do we really trust them to identify the right prospects to come back and make it worthwhile? No. Even Dylan Cease, he put together a great year too. He put together a really good year with San Diego. Now, I will say this for Dylan Cease, now that we're on the topic with him, going back, we'll kind of round this thing up. We started with Carlos Rodon, former White Sox. Well, I'm with Dylan Cease, former White Sox. He's starting to earn the reputation of being a playoff choker. His first start with the White Sox, you might remember this start, is that epic game with Leury Garcia hit the home run that earned him the extra contract the next year, but was one of the best White Sox home runs in recent memory. But Dylan Cease, believe it or not, he made that first start. He had a perfect 1-2-3 inning, threw some gas, 102 to get a strikeout that first inning. Crowd was rocking, got back out in the second inning. Things got a little rocky. He didn't even make it to the second. He was pulled from the game. And he said, hey, I learned from that start. Heading into his next start with the Padres in the postseason, he's like, you know what? I was a little amped up. We're going to do a better job controlling our adrenaline this time around. He got he got lit up again. Put a fastball over the heart of the plate to Ohtani. That ball got tattooed. He only lasted 3 1/3 innings. So then they tried to pitch him on short rest. Season on the line. They needed to win that game. They're like, he's our best pitcher. We're throwing him in on short rest. And Dylan Cease, quite frankly, he let the team down. He let him down again. Another terrible start. Now, I disagree with the season. The decision to start him on short rest, I think they would have been better off just waiting until game 5, give him the full day rest. But with his history in the postseason, it's a very small sample size. But the man hasn't made it through the 4th inning yet. That's a problem. And in 2 of those starts, he didn't even make it to the 3rd. So, a lot of red flags there with old Dylan Cease in the postseason. I hate it for him because he's one of my favorite White Sox pitchers and very cerebral guy, too. You would think he would handle the pressure of the playoffs. I mean, everyone handles it differently, but he does a good job. You can never really tell what he's thinking. And I do appreciate about that. And even if he's pitching well or he's getting shelled, he's always got the same look on his face. Which is I think is very impressive. But man, that was a tough look for our boy in the postseason there. I hate that he's he's going down the Kershaw path. Elite regular season pitcher, postseason choker. Hopefully he can turn that around. But that was a little disappointing to see because I was really rooting for the Padres in that one. Final thing we'll talk about here. This just came to mind. But I wrote about it on Sports Mockery earlier this week with Michael Kopech. Because Kopech, while Dylan Cease went home, he's moving on. He has been phenomenal this postseason. Another whiff on the White Sox, trading him for literally pennies on the dollar, pretty much. And with throwing him in with Fetty and Pham, and then we got Miguel Vargas back in return. Yippee. But he's been damn good. And I hear a lot of people, the sentiment is constantly, and I get it because the White Sox aren't good at developing prospects, but the sentiment is constantly, look what happens when he goes to the Dodgers, away from the White Sox organization. He's listening to their coaches. He's so much better now. Watching him, though, and looking at the numbers, he's really doing a lot of the similar stuff that he was doing earlier this year with the White Sox. Now, he's been often criticized for throwing too many fastballs. He even admitted as much after blowing a save in Miami back in June. He blew a save. He threw predominantly fastballs. I think he had 20 pitches, I want to say, and like 18 of the 20 were fastballs. It ended up, he walked a guy, gave up a double, and then gave up a walk-off homer to Jake Berger. So a couple of days later, he comes out and he redeems himself and he talks to the media and he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm starting to embrace the game plan the White Sox had for me, which is mixing in some more breaking balls. And everyone's like, what the heck? He wasn't listening to White Sox coaches. He should have been throwing more breaking balls. Then we see he throws a immaculate inning against the Twins. And it's like, well, look, he's fixed himself. So the signs were there that he started to turn that puppy around. Gets traded to the Dodgers. Success continues. He's still doing well. And everyone's like, oh, look, see, it was the Dodgers coaching. They turned it around. It wasn't. Because number one, he admitted he was not listening to the White Sox. But number two, if you really watch him with the Dodgers, in that last outing he had, even in that game 5, he's gone back throwing predominantly fastballs. He knows fastball is my best pitch. He feels the most confident in it. And I think now he was a little hesitant midway through the year. He's like, well, maybe I should be throwing more. Now he's reaching back and he's letting that thing eat. He is just firing fastballs. And I love it. And that game 5, it was almost all of his pitches were fastballs. He's throwing over 70% fastballs, 4-seam fastballs this season. And they know it. Manny Machado was out earlier in the series. He's talking to Jackson Merrill, and he's like, barking at him from the dugout in Spanish. He's like, he's horrible right now. Horrible. Just lay back on a fastball and hit it. Well, Jackson Merrill, that at bat, guess what? He struck out on a 4-seam fastball. All these other teams know it. It's the scouting report on Cease. Cease doesn't give a fuck, though. He's reaching back, and he's letting that thing eat, and it's so much fun to watch. And I'm so happy that he's finally starting to see some success. But make no mistake, I do not think this was some, like, revolution where, like, oh, he's starting to throw, the Dodgers magically fixed him. No, I think they told him, like, hey, look. And I don't know what they did, but I think even just listening to one of his interviews in Foul Territory, I think now he just has confidence in that 4-seam fastball, and he's just, I don't reach back and fire that thing. This is my best pitch. See if you can hit it. And I love that mentality. And I'm glad he's succeeding. The guy's been good. And the last time he was this good, too, I should mention, the last time he had numbers like this, and the last time he had this high of a fastball usage, now it's never been this high, but last time he had this high of a fastball usage, or around this amount, back in 2021 was in the bullpen, and he had his best season up until this point. So, 4-seam fastball, hey, let it ride. Love to see it. Good for you, Michael Kopech. That's all I got for you. We'll have some more White Sox talk next Wednesday at noon. Some manager updates, I am sure, and then more progress on how our White Sox alumni performing in the postseason and any other news that comes up in between that. Thank you all so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your week.